The massive space station Nexus Prime hung in the void like a metallic flower, its countless arms reaching out into the darkness. Ships of every conceivable design docked at its ports, sleek Vorthak vessels that seemed to flow like liquid metal, the geometric crystalline ships of the HFY, and the living bioships of the Mycelian collective that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Ambassador Elena Vasquez pressed her face against the small porthole of their cramped transport vessel, watching the magnificent structure grow larger as they approached. Behind her, the other members of humanity's first diplomatic mission to the Galactic Council shifted nervously in their seats. They had traveled 18 months through hyperspace to reach this moment, and now that it was here, the weight of representing their entire species felt crushing. "Remember," Captain Marcus Chen said quietly, his weathered face serious, "we're here to observe first, establish peaceful contact second. Earth needs allies, not enemies." Dr. Sarah Okafor, their xenobiologist, nodded while reviewing her notes on the various species they would encounter. "The Galactic Council has been established for over 3,000 years. Humanity is, well, we're the newcomers who just discovered fire, relatively speaking." The docking procedure was smooth, handled entirely by automated systems far more advanced than anything Earth possessed. As they disembarked, the sheer scale of Nexus Prime became apparent. The corridors were vast enough to accommodate species ranging from the tiny, insectoid Crixta to the massive, elephant-like Borvani. The air was precisely controlled, with different atmospheric zones for different species, all seamlessly blended through advanced environmental systems. Their guide was a Vorthok named Zexnar, whose silver skin rippled with patterns of greeting as they met. The translator implants they had received worked flawlessly, converting the musical tones of the Vorthak language into clear English. "Welcome, representatives of humanity," Zexnar said, and Elena couldn't help but notice the slight pause, as if the guide had to remind himself of their species' name. "You are to be presented to the Council in Chamber 700. This is quite an honor for such a young civilization." As they walked through the corridors, Elena observed the other species. The HFY moved in perfect unison, their crystal bodies chiming softly as they communicated. A group of thornback warriors from the Karek Empire stomped past, their armored carapaces scarred from countless battles. Everywhere she looked, she saw beings that had mastered technologies humanity could barely comprehend. "Your species has barely achieved interstellar travel," Zexnar continued conversationally. "Most civilizations require at least 500 years of spaceflight before they discover the hyperspace corridors that connect our worlds. Humans accomplished this in less than 200 years. Quite curious." The way he said curious made it sound less like a compliment and more like a polite way of calling them reckless. They entered a massive amphitheater, where hundreds of beings from dozens of species occupied floating platforms, arranged in concentric circles. At the center, on the highest platform, sat the 5 members of the Council's ruling body. A Vorthak, whose silver skin bore intricate golden patterns, denoting high rank. A HFY, whose crystalline form pulsed with deep blue light. A Mycelian whose fungal growths had formed elaborate crown-like structures. A Karak whose battle-scarred shell spoke of ancient victories, and a being Elena didn't recognize, something that looked like a living shadow with points of light for eyes. "Council of the Galactic Alliance," Zexnar announced, his voice amplified throughout the chamber. "I present the representatives of humanity from the third planet of a yellow star they call Sol." A wave of what Elena could only describe as polite indifference rippled through the chamber. Some beings turned to look at them with mild curiosity. Others seemed more interested in their data tablets. The Vorthak Council member, whose nameplate identified him as High Arbiter Kelthon, spoke first. "Humans of Sol 3, welcome to the Galactic Alliance. We have reviewed your species file. You have achieved chemical rocketry, primitive nuclear fission, and basic electronic computing. Your population is approaching 8 billion on a single world, which suggests either impressive efficiency or concerning overcrowding." Dr. Okafor stepped forward. "Thank you for this opportunity, High Arbiter. We come seeking knowledge and peaceful cooperation with the civilizations of the galaxy." The HFY Council members' light pulsed in patterns that the translator interpreted as mild amusement. Your species is eager. We will grant that. However, the Alliance has strict protocols. New species must demonstrate certain capabilities before full membership can be considered. What sort of capabilities? Captain Chen asked. The Mycelian Council member's voice came as a whisper of spores that the translator converted to words. Scientific advancement. Of course. Cultural sophistication. Military strength to contribute to galactic security. Your species has potential, but you are not yet ready for the responsibilities of Alliance membership. However, the shadow being said, its voice like an echo from a deep cave. We offer associate status. You may establish a small trading post on Nexus Prime. Your ships may use the outer hyperspace lanes. In time, perhaps a century or two, when your species has matured, we can revisit full membership. Elena felt her heart sink. They had come so far, hoped for so much, only to be politely dismissed, like children asking to sit at the adults' table. The Carrick Council members' mandibles clicked in what might have been approval. This is generous. Many species wait 5 centuries before being offered even associate status. The Council recognizes that humans show unusual persistence for such a young race. Again, that word choice. Persistence, not determination. As if they were stubborn children who refused to give up on a game they couldn't understand. The ceremony continued with the formal presentation of associate membership credentials, a simple data crystal that would identify human ships to Alliance patrols and grant them limited access to Alliance facilities. It was more than many species ever received, Zexnar assured them afterward. But Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were being patted on the head and sent away. Over the following weeks, as they established humanity's small trading post in one of Nexus Prime's lesser commercial districts, Elena and her team observed the casual dismissal with which other species regarded them. The Vorthak merchants who deigned to trade with them spoke slowly, as if to children. The HFY scientists who examined their technology did so with the kind of polite interest one might show a child's crayon drawing. The Carrick warriors simply ignored them entirely. It's not malicious, Dr. Okafor observed one evening as they shared dinner in their modest quarters. They're not trying to insult us. They genuinely see us as primitives who aren't worth serious consideration, which might work in our favor, Captain Chen said thoughtfully. Underestimation can be a powerful advantage. Elena nodded, though she couldn't shake a growing frustration. Humanity had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that would have destroyed weaker species. They had gone from horse-drawn carriages to spacecraft in barely 2 centuries. They had art, music, literature, and philosophical traditions that were thousands of years old. Yet here, they were seen as nothing more than talented barbarians. The pattern became clear over their months on Nexus Prime. When humans offered solutions to problems, they were politely ignored. When they demonstrated Earth technologies, they were met with condescending approval. When they tried to contribute to Alliance discussions, they were gently reminded that such matters were beyond their current understanding. The breaking point came when Elena attended a scientific symposium on environmental reconstruction. Dr. Okafor had submitted a paper on Earth's ecosystem recovery techniques, particularly the methods used to restore forests and oceanic systems damaged by early industrial activity. The presentation was scheduled for a small side chamber, as befitted work from such a primitive species. Elena watched as Dr. Okafor presented humanity's reforestation techniques, their ocean cleanup technologies, and their atmospheric restoration methods. The audience of mostly mycelian scientists listened with polite attention, occasionally taking notes. When the presentation ended, the lead mycelian scientist, a being called Spore Singer Veltan, responded with what Elena was learning to recognize as the standard, dismissive praise. How quaint. Your species has developed these crude but effective methods through trial and error, we assume. Of course, proper environmental management requires computational systems beyond your current capabilities, but these techniques might work for less complex ecosystems. Dr. Okafor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Actually, Our methods have successfully restored complex multi-species ecosystems, covering millions of square kilometers. The Sahara Reforestation Project alone. Yes, Velton interrupted gently. I'm sure these techniques work adequately for your simple planetary environment. Perhaps in a few centuries, when your computational abilities mature, you might develop something approaching true ecosystem management. Elena saw Dr. Okafor's hands clench into fists, and she knew exactly how the scientist felt. The casual dismissal wasn't just insulting, it was wrong. Earth's ecosystems were incredibly complex, and humanity had learned to work with that complexity rather than simply overwhelming it with computational power. That night, as Elena stared out at the stars visible through their quarter's small window, she made a decision. Humanity would prove itself. One way or another, the galaxy might see them as primitive newcomers now. But Elena had a feeling that wouldn't last forever. The universe, she was beginning to understand, had a way of teaching valuable lessons to those arrogant enough to think they knew everything. And if there was one thing humans had always been good at, it was learning from experience, both their own and others' mistakes. Unknown to the comfortable civilizations of the Galactic Alliance, change was coming, and it would arrive in the form of the species they had so casually dismissed as too young, too primitive, and too insignificant to matter. The stars continued to shine in the darkness, indifferent to the plans of both the established powers and the newcomers who dared to dream of something greater. The emergency klaxons that echoed through Nexus Prime had never sounded before in the station's, quote, 3,000-year history. Elena burst from her sleep as the lights in their quarters shifted to a pulsing red, and the universal translator crackled with urgent announcements in dozens of languages. All species representatives report to emergency stations immediately. This is not a drill. Galactic-class threat detected in the Kepler Void region. All available resources are being mobilized. Captain Chen was already pulling on his uniform when Elena stumbled into the common area of their quarters. Dr. Okafor emerged from her room with her portable lab equipment, a habit she'd developed from years of field research in unpredictable conditions. "What's a galactic-class threat?" Elena asked. But Chen was already activating their communication system to contact Earth. The answer came not from Earth, but from their guide Zexnar, who appeared at their door with his silver skin pattern shifting through rapid cycles of distress and urgency. "You must come immediately to Council Chamber 1, he said, his usual measured tone replaced by something approaching panic. "All associate members are required to witness this. Your species representatives need to understand what we face." They followed him through corridors filled with beings moving with military precision. The casual, almost leisurely atmosphere of Nexus Prime had vanished, replaced by the focused efficiency of a civilization preparing for war. Council Chamber 1 was packed beyond capacity. Elena had never seen so many species in one place, and the tension was palpable. The 5 council members stood at the center of a massive holographic display that showed a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. High Arbiter Kelthon's voice cut through the noise. "Citizens of the Alliance, we face the return of an ancient enemy. Long-range sensors have detected devourer signatures in the Kepler Void. They have awakened." A collective gasp rose from the assembled beings. Elena saw fear in the faces of species she had thought were beyond such emotions. The crystal forms of the Zephi dimmed to nearly black, while the Karak warriors' battle-scarred shells seemed to tremble. "For those civilizations too young to remember," the Mycelian council member whispered, "the devourers are mechanical entities of unknown origin. They consume all matter, planets, stars, living beings, and convert it into more of their kind. 10,000 years ago, they nearly destroyed all life in this galaxy before mysteriously withdrawing to the void between galactic arms." The holographic display zoomed in on the Kepler Void, showing a region of space that Elena had always assumed was simply empty. Now, it was alive with movement, thousands of dark shapes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Our long-range analysis indicates at least 50,000 Devourer units," the Shadow Being Council member reported. "They are moving toward the galactic core at sublight speed, consuming everything in their path. At their current rate of advance, They will reach the outer colonies in 18 months. Dr. Okafor leaned close to Elena. 18 months, she whispered. That's barely enough time to evacuate even the outer systems. The HFY Council members' form pulsed with urgent light patterns. All member civilizations will contribute to the war effort according to their capabilities. The Vorthak will provide industrial capacity and logistics coordination. The HFY will handle computational warfare and electronic systems. The Carrick Empire will lead ground assault forces. The Mycelians will manage biological and chemical warfare capabilities. What about us? Elena found herself asking aloud, the question escaping before she could stop herself. The chamber fell silent. Thousands of alien eyes turned toward the small human delegation. High Arbiter Kjelthon's silver skin rippled with what Elena was learning to recognize as patronizing patience. Humanity will be relocated to safe systems beyond the likely combat zone, he said gently. Your species is too valuable to risk in direct combat. And your technology levels make meaningful contribution impossible. Consider this a learning experience. Observation of how mature civilizations handle existential threats. Elena felt her face burn with embarrassment and anger. Around them, other species began talking among themselves. The topic of humanity apparently closed, but Captain Chen stepped forward, his military bearing evident despite being surrounded by beings who could crush him without effort. With respect, High Arbiter, humanity requests permission to review the tactical situation before accepting evacuation. We may have perspectives that could prove useful. The Carrick Council members' mandibles clicked with what might have been amusement. Human, your species has never faced an enemy like the Devourers. Your largest conflicts involved perhaps millions of your own kind fighting with chemical explosives and projectile weapons. The Devourers have consumed entire star systems. There is nothing in your experience that applies here. Perhaps not. Chen replied calmly. But sometimes, fresh eyes see solutions that experience overlooks. For a moment, Elena thought the council would simply dismiss them. Then the shadow being spoke. Very well. You have 72 hours to review our tactical databases and present any insights you believe relevant. Consider this a final courtesy to a species we hope to preserve. The next 3 days blurred together as Elena, Dr. Okafor, and Captain Chen immersed themselves in data about the Devourers. What they learned was terrifying. The Devourers were not biological, but they adapted and evolved like living creatures. They consumed matter and energy to replicate themselves, but they also learned from each encounter, becoming more effective with every battle. Their technology was millennia ahead of even the most advanced Alliance civilizations. Look at this, Dr. Okafor said during their second day of research, pointing to a tactical analysis from the ancient war. Every time the Alliance developed a new weapon or strategy, the Devourers adapted within months. Quantum disruptors, gravitational weapons, even dimensional warfare. Nothing remained effective for long. Elena studied the patterns. They're treating this like a conventional military problem. Build bigger weapons, develop better defenses, fight harder. But that's exactly what failed last time. Captain Chen nodded slowly. The Alliance is thinking like a military hierarchy. Coordinated attacks, strategic withdrawals, holding defensive positions. But what if that's exactly the wrong approach? On their third day, Elena found herself staring at a biological analysis Dr. Okafor had compiled. Despite being mechanical, the Devourers exhibited behaviors remarkably similar to certain Earth organisms. They're like army ants, she said suddenly. Or locusts. They swarm, consume everything in an area, then move on to the next food source. But what happens to army ants when their environment changes unpredictably? Dr. Okafor looked up from her data tablet. They get confused. Their coordination breaks down. They're incredibly efficient in predictable environments, but environmental chaos disrupts their collective behavior. And what's the most chaotic, unpredictable environment in space? Elena asked. Captain Chen was already accessing stellar cartography data, asteroid fields, nebulae, regions with unstable gravitational fields and electromagnetic interference. They worked through the night, developing what Elena privately thought was either the most brilliant tactical insight in galactic history or the stupidest idea ever conceived by humans. When they presented their findings to the council, the chamber was less crowded. Most species representatives had left to begin war preparations, leaving only the council members and a few military observers. "High Arbiter," Elena began, "we believe the Alliance's current strategy plays directly into Devourer's strengths. You're planning to meet them with superior technology and coordinated military force, exactly the approach they've already proven they can counter." The Karak Council members' shell rattled with what Elena hoped was skepticism rather than anger. "And what does humanity propose instead? Flowers and kind words? Environmental warfare," Captain Chen said simply. "Not fighting the Devourers directly, but changing the battlefield in ways that disrupt their coordination and adaptation." Dr. Okafor activated her presentation. Devourers exhibit swarm behavior similar to Earth insects. Their strength comes from collective action and rapid adaptation. But swarm intelligence fails when environmental conditions become unpredictable faster than the swarm can adapt. The holographic display showed their proposal. Instead of meeting the Devourers head-on, Alliance forces would retreat while systematically destabilizing every system in the Devourer's path. Stars would be induced to solar flare activity. Planets would have their orbits adjusted to create chaotic gravitational fields. Asteroid belts would be scattered into debris clouds. Gas giants would be seeded with compounds that created unpredictable electromagnetic storms. "You propose to make a quarter of the galaxy uninhabitable," the Mycelian Council member observed. "Temporarily," Elena said. "The changes would be reversible with time and effort. But while they're in effect, the Devourers would face constantly changing conditions. Their adaptation cycles would be disrupted by the need to respond to environmental chaos rather than military tactics." High Arbiter Kelthon's skin patterns shifted through several configurations before settling on what Elena recognized as deep thought. "This is unprecedented," he said finally. "You propose to use the galaxy itself as a weapon." "More accurately," Dr. Okafor said, "we propose to use the galaxy's natural processes as a defense mechanism. Like an immune response." The HFY Council members' light patterns accelerated. The computational requirements for coordinating such an effort would be staggering. Environmental modifications across hundreds of star systems. Time to create maximum chaos when the Devourers arrive. "Which is where human experience becomes relevant," Captain Chen said. "Our species has spent centuries learning to work with chaotic systems rather than controlling them. Weather prediction, ecosystem management, disaster response. We're specialists in adaptation and improvisation." Elena watched the council members exchange glances, or whatever passed for glances among their various species. She could see them reassessing humanity. Perhaps for the first time truly considering what humans might offer besides primitive enthusiasm. This plan would require sacrificing dozens of star systems. The shadow being pointed out. Civilizations would lose their homeworlds, even if only temporarily. "The alternative is losing them permanently to the Devourers," Elena replied. "And our projections suggest that environmental disruption would slow the Devourer advance significantly, giving Alliance forces time to develop new strategies, while the enemy struggles with constant adaptation challenges." The chamber fell silent for several minutes. Elena could hear her own heartbeat in the quiet. Finally, High Arbiter Kelthon spoke. "This proposal requires further analysis, but it has merit. Humanity will join the strategy committee with full voting privileges. Your species may not have the technology to implement this plan, but you clearly have the insight to conceive it." As they left the chamber, Elena caught Zexnar looking at them with something approaching respect. "Your species continues to surprise us," he said quietly. "Perhaps we have been hasty in our assessments." Elena smiled. "You haven't seen anything yet." She was right. The galaxy was about to learn what humans could accomplish when they stopped trying to meet others' expectations and started playing to their own strengths. The war against the Devourers would be unlike anything the galaxy. 6 months later, Elena stood in the primary command center of Nexus Prime, surrounded by screens showing the largest coordinated military operation in galactic history. What had started as humanity's desperate proposal had evolved into something unprecedented. An alliance of species working together, not to fight the devourers directly, but to turn the galaxy itself into their weapon. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. Within weeks of the Council's approval of the environmental warfare strategy, human advisors had been attached to every major fleet and research station. For the first time in galactic history, a newly contacted species was helping to lead a galaxy-wide defense effort. Status report from the Kepler sector, announced Commander Thax Wool, a Carrack officer who had initially been skeptical of the human plan, but had become one of its strongest advocates. Solar disruption charges have been successfully deployed around the K-class star. Predictive models show a 60% increase in solar flare activity beginning in 4 days. Elena consulted her data tablet, which now bore the insignia of the Strategic Environmental Coordination Division, a department that hadn't existed before humans suggested it was necessary. The tablet showed the progress across dozens of systems, each being methodically prepared to become uninhabitable just as the devourer swarms arrived. The Vega system modifications are complete, Dr. Okafor reported from her station. She had been promoted to Chief Environmental Warfare Specialist, a title that made her laugh every time she heard it. Asteroid belt dispersion is proceeding on schedule. When the devourers arrive, they'll find a debris field generating constant micro-impacts and electromagnetic interference. Captain Chen, now bearing the rank of Strategic Coordination Admiral, despite never having commanded anything larger than a research vessel, studied the tactical display. Devourer advanced scouts are 3 days from the Kepler perimeter. If our calculations are correct, this is where we find out if we're brilliant or crazy. Elena watched the countdown timer that had become the focus of billions of beings across the galaxy. In 72 hours, the most feared enemy in galactic history would encounter humanity's first real contribution to galactic defense. The irony wasn't lost on her. The species dismissed as too primitive for meaningful participation was now leading the effort to save everyone. The changes hadn't been limited to strategy. Elena had watched the fundamental assumptions of galactic civilization shift over the past months. The rigid hierarchies that had characterized alliance thinking for millennia had given way to more flexible, adaptive approaches inspired by human organizational methods. Dr. Velton, the mycelian scientist who had so dismissively critiqued human environmental techniques, now worked directly with Dr. Okafor on ecosystem disruption patterns. Elena had overheard him telling a colleague that human, crude trial-and-error methods were actually sophisticated adaptation strategies that formal computational models couldn't replicate. The beautiful thing about this approach, Velton had said, his translator rendering the spore speech with obvious admiration, is that it requires understanding systems rather than controlling them. Humans seem to grasp intuitively what we've spent millennia trying to compute. The first test came exactly on schedule. Long-range sensors detected devourer scouts entering the Kepler system, where the local star had been induced into violent instability. Elena held her breath as the data streamed in. Devourer units are stopping, reported the HFY sensor operator, her crystal form pulsing with confusion. They appear to be analyzing the stellar activity before proceeding. Elena grinned. They're trying to adapt to the changed environment before continuing. That's exactly what we hoped would happen. For 6 hours, the Devourer scouts remained stationary while the unstable star continued its artificial tantrum. When they finally began moving again, their formation had changed from the efficient swarm pattern to something more cautious and scattered. Advance speed reduced by 40%, Chen reported. Formation cohesion down by 60%. They're treating each system as a separate problem, instead of maintaining swarm coordination. High Arbiter Kelthon, who had taken to spending most of his time in the human-designed command center, rippled with what Elena now recognized as excitement. Your species has made them think, instead of simply consuming. Remarkable. The pattern held as the Devourers encountered system after system of environmental chaos. Stars that flared unpredictably, gravitational fields that shifted without warning, asteroid belts turned into particle storms, gas giants seeded with compounds that created electromagnetic mazes. Each system forced the Devourers to stop, analyze, adapt, and reorganize before proceeding. They're learning to handle our disruptions, Dr. Okafor observed during the third week of the campaign. But they're learning slowly, and every adaptation takes time and resources. Elena nodded. And while they're adapting to environmental chaos, they're not adapting to military tactics. Our fleet actions are becoming more effective because the Devourers are expending their adaptive capacity on dealing with stellar physics instead of weapons technology. The breakthrough came in the Centauri cluster, where Alliance forces had prepared the most ambitious environmental modification yet attempted. 3 star systems had been linked into a chain reaction of gravitational anomalies that created what human astrophysicists had dubbed a cosmic storm, a region where the laws of physics seemed to change every few hours. The Devourer main fleet entered the cluster and promptly fell apart. "I'm seeing complete formation breakdown," reported Admiral Kerthak, a veteran Carrick commander who had initially opposed putting humans in strategic positions. Individual Devourer units are pursuing separate courses. Some are trying to retreat, others are attempting to consume stellar matter despite the gravitational chaos. They appear to be confused. Quote, Elena watched the tactical display in amazement. The Devourers, who had terrified the galaxy for millennia, were behaving like lost children. Their swarm intelligence had been so thoroughly disrupted that they couldn't coordinate responses to either the environmental hazards or the Alliance fleet attacks that followed. "All units, this is Admiral Chen," came the voice over the command frequency. "Implement Operation Shepherd's Hook. Drive the scattered units toward the prepared gravity well in Sector 7. What followed was less a battle than a rescue operation in reverse. Alliance forces herded the confused Devourer units toward an artificial black hole that Dr. Okafor's team had prepared as a disposal site. The entities that had once moved with terrifying coordination now stumbled into the trap like animals fleeing a forest fire. 60% of the main Devourer force eliminated, Thaxwool reported, his mandibles clicking with what Elena had learned was Carrick amazement. Remaining units are retreating toward the galactic rim at maximum velocity. The command center erupted in celebration. Beings from dozens of species embraced, cheered, and performed victory rituals that spanned the spectrum of galactic culture. Elena found herself swept up in a group hug with a mycelian engineer and 2 HFY technicians, an experience that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. But the real transformation came in the weeks that followed. Elena watched as the rigid caste systems and technological hierarchies of galactic civilization began to dissolve. Species that had maintained carefully defined roles for millennia began sharing knowledge and techniques across traditional boundaries. The Carrick Empire established exchange programs with human military academies, wanting to study what they called adaptive tactical thinking. The Vorthak Confederation began implementing human organizational structures that emphasized flexibility over efficiency. The HFY opened their computational networks to include human intuition-based problem-solving algorithms. "Your species has changed everything," Zexnar told Elena during a diplomatic reception celebrating the Devourer defeat. His silver skin patterns had developed new configurations that Elena's translator identified as profound respect, with undertones of amazement. "We didn't do anything special," Elena replied. "We just looked at the problem differently." "That," said High Arbiter Kelthon, approaching with a ceremonial scroll that Elena recognized as formal Alliance membership documentation, "is precisely what makes it special. For 3,000 years, we approached challenges with the assumption that superior technology and computational power would solve everything. Your species reminded us that intelligence isn't just about processing power, it's about adaptation, creativity, and the willingness to think beyond established patterns." Elena accepted the scroll, knowing it represented full Alliance membership for humanity, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. But more than that, it represented something unprecedented. A young species being granted not just membership, but respect. "There will be statues," the Mycelian Council member had told her earlier. "Songs among the Vorthak harmony weavers. Crystal memory matrices among the HFY. The defeat of the Devourers will be remembered across the galaxy, and humanity's role will not be forgotten." Elena smiled, thinking of Earth and the billions of humans who had no idea their species had just saved the galaxy and revolutionized galactic civilization in the process. Dr. Okafor appeared at her elbow, grinning broadly. I just received a message from Earth. The Council has approved our recommendation to establish a Galactic Environmental Coordination Academy. They want us to train representatives from every Alliance species in ecosystem warfare techniques. And, Captain Chen added, joining them with Admiral Stripes still looking strange on his uniform, the Strategic Command has requested that human advisors be permanently assigned to every major Alliance fleet. Apparently, our primitive intuition is now considered an essential military asset. Elena laughed, remembering their first day on Nexus Prime when they had been politely dismissed as too inexperienced to contribute meaningfully to galactic affairs. Now, 6 months later, human thinking had become the foundation of an entirely new approach to galactic defense and cooperation. As the celebration continued around them, Elena looked out through the massive viewports at the stars that humanity had just helped save. Somewhere out there, the surviving devourers were fleeing to the dark spaces between galaxies. Their threat ended not by superior firepower but by the simple human insight that sometimes the best way to fight an enemy is to change the rules of engagement entirely. The galaxy had underestimated humanity, dismissing them as primitive newcomers with nothing to offer. They had been wrong. Humanity's gift to the galaxy wasn't advanced technology or computational power. It was the ability to see solutions that others missed, to adapt when adaptation seemed impossible, and to never accept that any problem was unsolvable. And now, as news of the victory spread across the galactic communication networks, a new legend was being born. Not of humanity, the primitive species that had somehow stumbled into membership, but of humanity, the species that had saved the galaxy by teaching it to think in entirely new ways. Elena watched a group of young beings from different species working together on some kind of engineering project. Their collaboration natural and unforced in a way that would have been impossible before the war. That, she realized, might be humanity's greatest contribution, not just saving the galaxy from the devourers, but showing it how to move beyond the limitations of its own assumptions. The stars shone a little brighter that night, and humanity's place among them was secure forever, had ever seen, and humanity was just getting started.